Good morning. Thanks for coming. Can everyone hear me? Yep. Okay, good. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm going to play you a video that kind of introduces Travelport, who we are, what we're doing, and then we'll go into describing our journey to unified monitoring and application performance management. So I would typically read through the bullet points here, but our CEO and president does such a much more elegant job. I'm going to switch over to that and let him do that for you. And then we'll jump back and describe some of the key factors that Travelport has.
When you become part of our travel commerce platform, you access an interconnected, expansive, collaborative, flexible, and relevant world of travel choice. From any device, from any place on Earth, our platform is answering and predicting the unmet needs of our industry and travel businesses like yours. If you're a network or a low-cost carrier, a hotel chain, an independent hotel, a car rental provider, a rail operator, a cruise or tour operator, when you connect to our platform, your brand and products are shared and promoted to the world's travel agencies and corporate travel buyers. If you're a leisure or mixed travel agency, a travel management company, an online travel agency, or a corporation who manages your own travel, when you search on our platform, you'll access an unrivaled choice of travel content and tools to help you sell more, book better, and work smarter, including a more efficient way to pay. If you're a developer, a travel entrepreneur, or an industry pioneer, when you become a platform partner, we'll collaborate to build the innovative tools that are creating value for everyone in the travel chain. Our approach and value proposition are unique, and so are the results. Please take a few minutes to explore travelport.com and discover how we're redefining travel commerce.
So as I mentioned, he did that in a much more elegant way than I ever could have done it. But I do want to jump into some fun facts about Travelport, given the breadth of what Gordon had just presented, to being a global company, global challenges to the travel industry, travel agents and customers and suppliers being all over the globe and in low latent countries, very high speed countries. We have different challenges there globally. To address a lot of that, we use our core systems and the bandwidth and the power that we have in our systems to do that, but we need to make sure we monitor them. So obviously, with 9 billion application performance calls a month, we have a lot of volume coming in from the customers, going through our 4 core TPF systems, the transaction processing facility mainframes, that are surrounded and coupled. I like to call the TPF core systems the meat in the sandwich, because they do a lot of processing for the messaging, the routing, and the core airline service processing for those services we provide to the 400 plus airlines. And of course, we have our travel agencies, those subscribers that use our systems and depend on it day to day to do their P&Rs, their reservations, their bookings for their customers, and being able to do that globally and quickly is key. We have 9,900 physical servers and virtual mix, so we've got a huge virtual infrastructure, but we've also got those really process-intensive systems that align with the mainframe systems to do a lot of that intense pricing, algorithmic processing that gives fares and shopping and processing payments for all of the customer transactions as well. So we have some challenges that we needed to identify, but I want to introduce myself first. I'm Harlan Hegwood. I'm a manager at the IT Organization and Infrastructure Services. We have been aligned. We're 1 year new, so we've been aligned with 10 folks to focus on application performance management and services. We have a breadth of experience. We've got network engineering, we've got monitoring, we've got mainframe development, distributed systems development, and systems management experience. So we've got the breadth and depth of the gamut of the experience we need to attack a lot of these goals and these objectives that we're looking to do. One of the things I should highlight is that the enterprise monitoring traditionally has been very production focused. And the problem with that is it doesn't align with a DevOps model. So we haven't really had a DevOps strategy per se, especially in the APM space. So we've had to work to align to that, working with the development teams, the performance engineering teams, getting collaboration on what it is we're doing, what our strategy is for APM. And I mentioned the challenges. As you saw earlier, with 9,900 servers, 4 core TPF systems, thousands of customers and clients using our services, things become more increasingly complex. So to stay up with those, we have to stay on top of what's changing, what is the environment, how is it bolted together, how is it working, where's our problems. To add to that, we've got cloud and microservices coming. We've got the ever expanding partnerships with third parties to use their data, to have them share our data, partnering with subscribers and distributors. And then I mentioned the DevOps collaboration. Again, we didn't really have a culture for the DevOps collaboration. It was kind of a keyword for a while, but I think it's kind of kicking in a lot more that this alignment really needs to help, and the company. But from that, it takes getting out of the old ways of doing things, getting out of the old mindsets. And that's difficult for a lot of organizations, whether it be a particular silo or multiple groups within the company. So that's been a challenge. And then one we can probably all speak to is the performance issues taking too long to resolve. I think I saw something on one of the other presentations. They said mean time between impacts. We've been very focused on mean time to recover, mean time to identify. I think all three are probably apropos, but we need a better way to identify the problem quickly without having 50, 60 people on a call all pointing fingers the opposite direction from where the actual problem is. And little do they know that would actually help them too. They don't have to sit on a call for hours and they know exactly that this is the problem. That would help them. So that's kind of the adoption or the evangelizing we've been doing about our strategy with APM. And it'll be an ongoing thing. So we knew that to get there we needed real-time data. It needed to correlate. And what we found, probably personally anyway, we found later, probably more than sooner, was that the business data alongside that performance data was key. Because then now you're engaging the business units, you're engaging even the product teams or even the product specialists who may not be the development team, but they liaise with the business and the development teams to show them that there's data here that could benefit them. Has actually gotten, just in the last few months anyway, some really big interest into what we're doing and how we can help them. So the desired state, I want to stop here for a second because what I'm going to show you is kind of our journey where we've kind of had challenges and then where we were able to identify what we wanted and where we wanted to be, and given the challenges we just reviewed, how would we get there given some of the previous engagements, some of the failed exercises we've done in the past for monitoring roadmap or strategy. I think it boils down to this: see more, and you can word it any way you want. I particularly like, on the gain deep and wide visibility, I like to call it end-to-end. It's a term that's more familiar to me, but when you think about some of the presentations that were given yesterday, they talk about the customer transaction originating at the customer's location or device all the way through to the end. Part of the problem we sit on calls for hours is because we don't know what those points are, because they're all siloed, monitored differently, owned by somebody else. So knowing that these pieces are all dependent on each other is very key to seeing what we need to see, so we can then fix the problem, the right time, the first time, and add quality to the performance recovery. I've added automatic discovery, configuration, and performance baselines here because we knew through other efforts and supporting other enterprise solutions that we were doing a lot of manual work. We had monitoring to something because someone said that was the KPI, or that was the metric we needed to monitor, because if CPU got to this point or threads got to this point, we needed to know that. And that's fine. The problem is when you monitor something, what else is going on? So the auto discovery, some of the auto configuration, and the auto learn baselines was important to us, and still is. We needed to manage performance better. Obviously, we're trying to reduce some of these things and get to a desired state beyond all calls and war room. So we needed to be able to measure the business impact. Traditionally, we didn't have a way to do that. We were monitoring services, which would be either a compilation of components that were being monitored and kind of netted together to say that we believe this is what we need to see as it reflects to the customer's impact and the business impact on the services. But we needed to improve that. Better KPIs, and we needed to go with a business transaction model because we didn't necessarily have a business transaction model. All with the goal to manage the customer experience better and improve it for them. Deliver faster. I think this is one that I had a challenge with at the beginning, but I definitely see the benefit now as we've gone through this 12-month journey so far, in that enabling the development teams, enabling the performance teams to see things earlier rather than later will help prevent, ideally in the end, that reactive mode. Know what's the problem, know it early, fix it, and then release it. Not only that, but you get the benefit of the customer improvement. You're not spending hours and cycles and dollars trying to fix problems that could have been caught earlier in the process, thus lowering cost of ownership and getting a return on investment on your input. I think AppDynamics keynote yesterday said driving digital transformation, and we're trying to do that across our key applications. So as I go forward, I'm going to talk a little bit about the journey and where we came from, as I mentioned, but how we decided to go with that focus, picking just a select few flagship products and making a decision to work there because we knew we had some slow delivery. We knew we had customer problems that we wanted to improve on. So focusing on that got us going somewhere rather than staying stagnant. So we'll call it Journey to Climb the Mountain. Basically, the journey for Travelport on where we came from. We had previous efforts, as I mentioned. We had monitoring roadmaps. We had discussions with architecture. We had discussions with networking. We had discussions with development as a collaborative effort. We had discussions with infrastructure. And what we find is that we all agreed that we have a bunch of stuff we need to monitor. We have a bunch of stuff we need to tie together and correlate. But no one could, for whatever reason, you could call it politics, disjointed approach, you could call it silos. Probably a factor of all of those played a role in us not being able to accomplish this. So what happened is our management team decided that we need to reboot this effort. We need to start it over, but do something that's going to give us something new. Let's not start it over, which is what we were doing here, and do the same thing, because we knew that failed, that didn't work. And we knew that if we kept doing that, we were just going to churn. So what they did was they kicked off a 2014 effort that allowed us to look at some of the key areas I mentioned earlier where we wanted to be. I want to also mention, who's here familiar with the APM framework, the Gartner published frameworks? What about the monitoring roadmap frameworks for maturity, monitoring maturity model? I personally found those things insightful. Now, they're very much an industry. This is the best case scenario. You follow this and do this and implement this and prioritize it this way. All good stuff. I found it very beneficial because it helped put kind of, if you've ever bowled and had to use the guards, I'm not saying I ever did, but if you had, it kind of put the guards on the focus. So it helps us focus on what we needed to do so we could get there early rather than churn, as I mentioned earlier. So end to end, I mentioned that. It's one of my favorite terms. We needed to review the customer, figure out where the problems were or where we had gaps, database, network, server, application level. We found that end to end from an application level, business transactions particularly, we just did not have a good insight into the health of the application. We had OS monitoring, network monitoring. The DBAs had database monitoring all day long, but it wasn't correlated and it wasn't end to end. So I mentioned we had to focus somewhere, so we picked some key flagship products, is what I like to call them. Here they're called high-value applications, and that's truly what they are. And we had to transform what we were doing there to a unified strategy so that we could move forward and not stay stagnant. So the goals drove us to look at vendors that had all of these things touted as what their focus was, what their big bang was, what their return was. We did a bake-off. I think that was mentioned in another session yesterday. And obviously, we're here, so we chose AppDynamics, and that's where we're focusing getting this on our platforms. And I will show you later some of the challenges, but some of the benefits we gained early on in this year, and then where we are this year and some of the new stuff we're doing to deliver on those goals and that long-term objective. So just a summary: end-user experience, end-to-end, business transaction KPIs, reducing cost, and then the wide adoption across the organizations through the whole SDLC, software development lifecycle, and into production. So just to summarize our getting started. Well, there we go. I don't know what happened to the text. This is kind of a summary of how we got started. We needed sponsorship. We had the sponsorship. They were the ones that said, let's reboot this effort. Let's do something new. That was key. We had to define the scope. I don't know how many of you worked on projects that, projects, I guess, 101, the definition is it has a start and a definite end. How many have worked on projects that seem that they're never going to end? They end up turning BAU, but they're still called projects. So we had to define the scope. What is it we were going to do? What we did was we picked these key applications I mentioned, and we said we're going to look at the customer up to the mainframe, because that seems to be where our biggest delivery failures have happened and some of the biggest impacts. So let's make sure we measure the applications we've selected in this new endeavor up to the mainframe. I won't even get into behind the mainframe because that's a whole other monster, but it's on the horizon. But we're trying to fix immediate problems and stop the bleeding. One way to do that was we needed to know our end user personas, because if you run in there and just start putting a solution in place and not know the technology, what your customers are doing and how they connect, what platform they're using, and some of the problems and challenges, you're going to end up failing. So you need to know, are they a desktop? Are they a web customer? These are high level. Do they use terminal connections over socket-based application calls? Knowing all that helps you kind of figure out where to focus. Maybe you divide and conquer, which is some of what we did. You get a couple guys over here in front of the team and the other part of the team focusing in parallel efforts. You focus on the web. We need end user experience. You focus on end user experience. Define what your end users are so you know where to focus. We mentioned collaboration, align with IT, ops, and dev teams. Again, that's going to be an ongoing thing. That's at least our experience. Ops is coming around pretty quickly because they would like to stop the bleeding. They page out people to get help. They look to people to get quick answers, and if the answers don't come quick, they're looking for anything they can do to get help. Some of our IT organizations are coming around, maybe not as fast as we'd like. And then we've got the dev teams, which we've had a kind of a mixed bag there. Some developers are very interested. You can help me. And they took it and ran with it and immediately started using it in their development and corrective action cycles before they went to production, and actually could show the business, hey, look what we were able to find within the first 2 weeks of using this. Other development teams are skeptical. This is mine. I don't want, So what we do is we constantly evangelize the benefits. It's those wins that we need to communicate to make sure that they're aware that, hey, you might be missing out on something. Come join the party. So I want to mention a little bit about initial benefits. So the first 6 months, the evangelizing part probably wasn't in my focus. And I'll give it to my boss because he said, you need to be evangelizing, you need to get to adoption. And we were so focused on these hundreds and hundreds of servers and agents and how do we automate this and how do we get it in there and make sure that the metrics are reporting right and doing all the alerting and that we probably were putting the evangelizing and the adoption stuff on the back burner, thinking, I guess, I don't know, Wayne's World mentality, that build it and they will come. Not necessarily what happened, but we did see some benefits quick. Correlation, I mentioned that earlier. You're able to see that this data that lived over here previously can now be seen with this data that we had to go over here to see. Now we can see it all in one and see the correlated benefit or correlated impact. We had the ability to break out by business transactions some of the key services and measure those. This is just a high-level screenshot, but we didn't even have this breakdown prior. We didn't have the business transactions showing us its learned baseline health, the calls, and then what tier or node and whether it was rated in the health as a slow, normal, very slow, or stalled. So now we have that correlation in the software telling us, instead of us having to build something like this and pull it all together through another set of tools or custom development. So I mentioned baselines, health violations. Real time, though, is key. One of the operations business units came to us and said, today we use these synthetic scripts that the performance team has written, and then we put them out on our sales offices all over the globe, and these scripts run against some of our applications to perform synthetic monitoring. We use the stats from that, import it into a spreadsheet every week, and then we run the executive performance dashboard that we send in our report to the execs. We're tired of doing that. The data is not reliable, the data is inconsistent, and we want to automate it because we want these people working on things better somewhere else than focusing on spreadsheets and putting reports together. They came to us and said, what can we do real time for the applications you have deployed in monitoring? And I said, well, here's what we can do. What is your requirements? And so what happened is they saw that with the APIs and the AppD controller, as well as some of the metrics that they weren't aware that we could capture, they're now pulling those from the API automatically into an exported file that provides them the real-time data for those key applications. From that, we believe they're going to want to expand. When can you get this one? What about this one? And so now across all applications, we'd have kind of a uniformity of the message and the details we're providing up. So those were the initial benefits. What this all builds up to, in my mind, is that now we've got something in place. It's kind of a base. So now we need to look at how we can get more benefits out of what we have in place. So we talked, as we were evangelizing to some of the groups, there were people that came up and said, hey, we have a problem over here with this customer. They seem to say that in the test environment that they can't connect to this particular service every Sunday, or whatever the problem was. There's been a few. So we came together in active working sessions, weekly meetings, and what have you, to discuss what the problems were, and realized that we really can get a benefit out of focusing on the customer. Now, to prepare you for where I'm going to go next, I should say that we're not very web-based. Very few applications can take advantage of the Enduser Experience module. Most of it is B2B. Most of it is APIs and SOAP services. So getting Enduser Experience to help us from the customer location isn't possible. So that's been a big challenge. But what we looked at and said was, well, can we at least, from the data we have at the front end, at least extract the data there to know how to help inform the business and the development teams who the customer is and how they're performing. So we were approached by one of the business teams, and they said, we need to kick off an improvement plan for this customer. Can you help? And it had executive sponsorship because these executives were very tied to this customer success. And we got the requirements, we provided a scope of work back to them and said, this is from the review, this is what we believe you're asking, and had them sign off on that. The nitty-gritty details of that was, again, knowing the application. Who's the customer? Where were they coming from? And what kind of technology were they using? Well, in this customer's case, we could just, pardon me, we could just pick one application and we would have missed the ball because we had to do some homework to find out where this customer was entering. And then we could come back with a recommendation and say, this is where we should focus. So what we did was we looked at previous details, Visios, support docs, all out of date. Anyone have that problem sometimes? So we took the best of the best, including network traces, and we said, this customer's coming in at us from all. They're coming in via terminal. They're coming in to us over dedicated WAN lines into our mainframes. But the problems that this business unit presented to us were primarily on the web applications and the API services that they were consuming. So when we did our scope of work, we said, let's focus on those, because that seems to be where they're timing out. That seems to be where they're saying back-end systems give them the data that they needed to see. So when we provided the scope of work, we said, we'll focus on these primary API services and the web service applications running on .NET. And they said, okay. So we went forward with that, and we found some challenges. Now, I've got this slide labeled analytics for a reason, because I'm going to build up to the challenges we had at the outset of this project and how we ended up overcoming that. So the first couple slides, I won't talk specific to analytics, but I will talk specific to the problem, or the challenge, I should say. We found out that the API service, so we had two applications you saw in the previous diagram. You had a .NET web application, and you had actually, let me go back to that. You had an API XML-based system that their data center connected to us. So their data center gateways and services made critical calls for their back-end systems into our API. They also had the front end, what I call anyway, legacy name probably, booking engines calling our web service in the .NET environment. So we knew we needed to instrument both of those and correlate this from a customer view. So they weren't having to go over here to look at the web data on that part of the business and then look at something else for the UAPI services. So we looked at it individually, learned the application end to end, and we found out that we could put the Java agents on the API, we could put the .NET agents on the .NET servers, and we were pretty golden with the .NET stuff. Fortunately, the way they wrote the application was in such a way that the app pools were divided out by customer. So that particular customer was actually showing up as its own app pool. So instrumentation became pretty easy for us in that environment because of the way they had the application written. So we could provide dashboards, metric browser details, reports, whatever we wanted out of AppD for that piece of the picture. But that was only part of it because we knew that, again, that would be segmenting the overall customer satisfaction view. So that was we left that kind of lower level, let it bake for a while, and then we focused on the API Java services, which is where we had to end up spending most of our time. In our previous implementations with Java, it was pretty quick win. You install the Java agent, it discovers the database calls, it discovers what it's doing over here with the external supplier calls, other web services. Not with this one. It discovered nothing. The application was custom written in such a way that it didn't expose those to the agent through traditional methods, so non-standard, whatever you want to call it. We had to keep digging. So we didn't have our correlation, we didn't have the auto-discovery, and then, of course, our goal to get some end-user statistics was bland. So what we did is we worked with AppD support, we worked with our development team over a couple weeks. We were able to identify what we needed to get out of the methods and class using the method invocations functions within the agent in the controller to expose that, keeping in mind that our goal was we needed to identify by unique customer, and in our case we used customer identification IDs, user experience, taking that and being able to show them what the experience was, both from an errors and a response time perspective, and then being able to expose any additional business metrics we may need. Location, name, ID, as I mentioned, all the things the business wanted and had given us as criteria. So now we'll jump into analytics, because once we got that instrumentation done, we had data. We may not have had all the fancy data flow maps for that particular business, but remember the goal was to present the customer information, not show them flow maps, but customer information. So we knew we needed errors, what the errors were, we needed response time, we needed the business transactions, and we needed all of the other customer details. So on the API service, as I mentioned, we added custom instrumentation through the method invocation data collector. We measured the overhead of that by doing a before and after with the performance team. So we had a performance environment where we didn't have AppDynamics instrumented. They ran a baseline test. Then we ran and added this instrumentation, and it was negligible, so they signed off on it, and we promoted it into our pre-production environment, which is the staging area right before production, to show the business units. And it was what they were looking for. The problem was we were missing errors. That particular instrumentation didn't give us the errors. What they were doing with errors, and particularly the business logic errors, not the system level errors, server 500 and all those different things that you can get, the exceptions and stuff that AppD can show you. We had to look at their logging methods in the application, which was a different set of methods and classes. Working with them, we did some tests, because what was happening is every time the transaction would execute, the pair method would execute a log to say who the user was, what the transaction was, what the log ID was. Okay, they were using this as a need-to-know basis in the logs to say, okay, if there's a problem, I know I can search for this ID in our log database. But it wasn't correlated right up front alongside the business transaction performance. So we instrumented that, and now we were able to do what the business asked us. We were able to provide them details not just for that customer, but all the customers coming in through the environment. We were excited, a little hesitant at first because we hadn't really seen this before. So we let it bake, let it churn in our minds for a while, that we could confidently go to the business and say, this is what we found, it's consistent. Do you want us to move forward into production? So we've got the response time experience and then the end user experience. If you've seen any of the analytics stuff or went to the training, and I'm not an expert in it, but there's the stuff that analytics gives you right away, and then there's the business things that you can instrument or add. Custom metrics. This is a mix match, a mash, I should say. The end user experience is more about what comes out of the box. The response time experience is more what comes out of the box. It's the instrumentation of dividing it up by customer detail that's really cool. The other thing is the bottom stuff, the transaction type and the error type is all custom business metric that we added to be able to get those 4 or 5 key metrics that they wanted to see. And we're finding that through that, we had some other interests come. And again, it's all with the goal of getting customer insight. No, it's not at their device. No, it's not at their data center. But it's something we didn't have before. We could mine logs and see kind of what was going on with a customer based on a customer ID or transaction type. But it wasn't real time, and it didn't give us the outcome where we could say, here's where they're coming from. Here's areas we need to focus on to improve. If you look at my crossword, and I'm not very good at crosswords, but you could see the key things that we focused on, the source, areas to improve, pulling the ID out, and how their customers using the product. Which transactions are they consuming? Because as I mentioned, we work with the network team to kind of see where they were coming in. All that told us was, here's their IP addresses, and here's the VIPs they're hitting on our key services. Nothing about the transactions, nothing about what it is they're consuming, how often they're consuming it. Now we can slice and dice it by that and show the business errors correlated to that. So in conclusion, I think I'm going to conclude by just giving some recommendations. Each business is different and unique, and each problem is unique. But know the pain areas and focus there. You're gonna stop the bleeding quicker, and it's going to be a quicker win for you. Don't, what's the term we use? Boil the ocean? Don't boil the ocean if you don't have to. You won't succeed. Know your applications. I mentioned that. If that means somebody sitting down with a development and an IT guy to walk through, IT gal, and walk through everything step to step, end to end, you need to do that. Keep customer focus. I think what they call it yesterday, customer obsession. I hadn't heard that before, but pretty much the same thing. Get sponsorship. We wouldn't have been here without sponsorship. Management stepping up and saying, hey, we need to do something different. Get adoption early. I mentioned that was a weak part for us, the first part of the year. And the benefits of having the application ingrained with a DevOps mindset. Think outside the box. I put this there because we weren't really focused on analytics. We were focused on delivering the monitoring and the flow maps and the discovery, stuff that we hadn't had before, the end user experience that they hadn't seen on some of the web apps that we had out there. But when we started looking at those other use cases, the thick client running across all the travel agencies and in the case of these API services, we realized that we're not going to be able to do that. How can we do that? So looking at analytics gave us kind of an outside-the-box solution for something immediate. So that, I felt that those were the key ones. The other points that I mentioned earlier about getting started, that really helps. And again, I mentioned the APM framework. I mentioned the monitoring maturity model. Helped us keep focused on some of the areas we wanted to bring up. We do have some next steps as a company and as a group. We're going to continue focus on analytics because it gives us extra insight into the data we already have instrumented. So we have a customer situation where they're all over the globe, but they're pretty much similar to that data center to Travelport connectivity model I mentioned. But each location has its own custom customer ID. So they wanted to see it by geo. I want to know that customer X in Latin America and customer X in their UK offices and customer X in their Canadian offices. I want to know them by location. break down their performance and what transactions they're consuming by performance. So we're going to look at using analytics to help us break it out there. We have the environment instrumented, we just don't have the analytics stripping that out to be able to show that part of the business. Of course, they want it by the end of the year, and here it is, December 3rd, right? API services, again, there's another API service environment that we have where they have a ton of logging going on. Anything you'd want to know about the transaction or the application, they're writing it to a log. We can use that with some of the new features in 4.1 and 4.2 of analytics, we believe, to test what we can do from the log perspective. Because what's happening is when we're on these problem calls with this team, they're off looking at logs, and we're off over here showing them AppDynamics screens. And what time frame was it? Well, let's check the logs. Well, our logs doesn't show that exception happening, or whatever the case. So now we believe there's a business benefit there to look at that and see what it can do for us. Enduser Experience. I mentioned the desktop software. We still have an objective and a need and a gap to fill to find out how we can see some of those end users and what they're doing. Whether it's the same model or method that we've used in previous use cases, or whether it's a brand new one. So we're working with AppDynamics engineering team and sales teams to figure out what the options would be. Again, you got to know what the technology is that they're running. Maybe it's not a fit. Maybe you have to look at something different in a different way. So we're working on that. So those will be our growing focus going forward. And then as we mature this, and we mature kind of our team and our goal, we're hoping that the enterprise monitoring will head toward more unified and less of what that picture was on slide 3 or 4 that I showed you, of where everything's kind of isolated and segmented. But that's all I have. I guess we can do Q&A. Anyone have any questions? Gentleman over here.
Are you using analytics for any type of trend analysis, month over month, year over year?
That's a great question. What we've been asked to do is look at what we can provide with the 30-day retention model and use analytics for operation type help. And with the abilities, especially coming in 4.2 and maybe even later as they enhance some of that, the alerting. And definitely, we want to integrate that into the alerting model that goes up to the IT NOC folks. And we're hoping, too, that that's the same group that's looking at the data because it's real time. We're hoping that will help them in that endeavor as well. Instead of them having to go out and pull from the API, just use the analytics functions to get what you need. Someone back there had their hand up earlier. Anyone else? Here?
You talked about quick wins for the customer, and your experience with that part of the business. But what about the wins from an operations perspective? So getting on these calls for 5 or 6 hours, how is it benefited the sustain or ops teams as we get the service restored? It sounds like things are coming up here in servers, are going to be part of now middleware piece, but seeing all the we're not there yet.
Yeah, to be honest with you, that one was a little confusing to us because we thought that was an easy one. Here it is. It's showing you right away. I'll give you an example. One of those API services had a problem, and it was sporadic, and the customers were calling in and complaining. A few customers were. It took them 2 hours to figure out it was 2 servers in a load-balanced farm that were stalled. AppDynamics was sitting right there. They could have went in and used it, but it was an icon over here on their service manager, not the stuff that traditionally they had used over the years and were comfortable with. We came back, and literally like in 10 minutes after the fact, we said, it shouldn't have taken you 2 hours. You just go here and you do this list view on all the nodes, and there they were, the 2 servers that were red. I said, was it these 2? And they said, yes, that was those 2. So under 10 minutes, I was able to show them that they could have saved themselves 2 hours if they would have used the tool. So again, it goes back to use and adoption. You have to show them the benefits, and then they'll come. And I'll tell you on that example, upper management found out about some of those cases, and they've been encouraged to use it. So hopefully that will, if they start using it, they start showing, hey, here's the problem, then development teams will say, oh, they found the problem. They'll start trusting the data, and we believe it will build more confidence in what we're doing. Any other questions?
Regarding the agent deployment.
Uh-huh.
You had like 9,000 or whatever. You're only looking at the key ones.
Right.
Agents have not all or using.
We'll wrap it up. Oh, yes, sorry. The question was on the agent deployment. Since we had shown in one of our slides that across the data center we have 9,900 unique nodes, is the question, what, did we deploy it across all, or how did we do that with the select applications we had? We had to figure out what our deployment model was, but we were just focusing on the front-end services and everything that they called. So it wasn't, let's put this agent on every single server. We had to make sense and have success early, so we had to focus on the end-to-end up to the mainframe. So if you picture these customers out here in a cloud, and then you picture the front-end web services, and then the business logic app tier, and then some of the gateways in our environment, and I should have had a better diagram for you on that. We instrumented wherever the transaction path was all the way up to the back-end mainframe. So it wasn't 9,900 servers of agent deployment. It was whatever .NET and Java we needed to fulfill that path of the transaction. Does that make sense? Going back on top of that, we implemented the AppD for database monitoring. So once we knew, because a lot of times I mentioned the Visios and the support docs are out of date, they may say this is the database we're consuming, but they may not, that may not be the only database they're consuming. So we used the application to help discover those, and then we went back and mapped those into the database monitoring. So it was accurate and correlated. Deployment methods, I won't talk to it because there are so many different ways to do it. Automated ways, manual ways, scripted ways. The agents are pretty easy to instrument, especially in the later versions. To get them installed, it's a lot easier and cleaner than maybe the 3.9. Any other questions? Oh, right there. Sorry.
How about the technologies which could not be instrumented with AppDynamics and any other technologies? Any plans or covered by any other ways?
So the question is what technologies do we have that could not be covered by AppDynamics, and were we doing those via other methods? There's a long list, and there's a long list in that list that probably we haven't gotten to yet, so we're not sure. I think the C agent is going to help in some cases. As I showed on that last slide, we've got that thick client. Well, they connect to a very C-based front-end system to get their connectivity to the mainframe. Mainframe monitoring, though, is pretty mature, so we didn't want to tackle that beast this year because we probably wouldn't have gotten as far as we are now. It would have distracted us from our goal. So we left the mainframe monitoring where it is and how it's working. It's just a monster. Everything from links out to vendors to calls coming in over dedicated WAN links. We would have still been working on that right now. Anything else? We have synthetic, but we're wanting to mature it because today it's a out-of-support legacy application that we have installed in our sales offices, and it's scripts that are written by our performance team. Obviously, those scripts are mature because it's based off of the scripts they use to test in the development lifecycle. The problem is that it's not correlated to anything, and that's the reason the ops team's coming to us, because it's not real time, it's not correlated, and it has problems. Sometimes the scripts won't run because the server's down or the latency's so bad. It's very inconsistent. So we'll be looking at synthetics going forward to see what we want to do there, what we need to do there. Yeah, David?
Are there tools that you put into displace or use that?
There is going to be. I can't say right off the bat that we've been able to displace any yet, but there is a list of those that we have, and in 2016 we're hoping to kill those off. Let it, or as one guy in our IT organization says, let it die on the vine. Yeah.
How long do you think for the adoption and training DevOps on all these conversations with business operations, developers, how long do you reach this stage?
I think it varies, and because I think we're still low in some areas, I couldn't give you a valid answer on, in a nutshell, this is what it would take. I do know what I can offer you is that early training we provided to development through our support hours with AppDynamics, and we also provided operational training. I think that gave them an idea of where we were going, but we weren't there yet. So what we're doing now is we're recycling with them and saying, part of what this young lady's question was about operations, what benefit are they getting out of it? Well, we're coming back and doing new training sessions with them for all of their shifts, because they're 24/7, so that we can do the train the trainer. We're going to refresh, so now that they saw what was coming, now that it's here, here's how you use it in your day-to-day. And it would be up to them to put it in their processes, but we want to make sure we're there to hold their hand if they need help. We're there to pick up the phone and call us, and we'll help you figure out how to make it work for you. For the development teams, as I mentioned, some of them, they want a full view. Some of them don't want anything exposed. So I can't really tell you. It's going to vary. I think your mileage is going to vary on that one sometime.
Are you in with DevOps?
Wrap up? Okay. We're not in a full DevOps model, but there's a lot of talk from architecture, a lot of talk from the businesses. So we actually have been using some of the training that we had with AppDynamics to show in a DevOps model how we could make this work better. So the message is out, and I think it's another adoption piece because we're not mature in a DevOps as an organization yet. It'll be a journey. So I think I was just given my cutoff time, but thank you for coming.